The city was alive with its usual hustle and bustle. People hurried through the park, their minds preoccupied with errands and schedules. Among them, Barron Trump, towering and composed, walked briskly with his team of discreet yet vigilant bodyguards. It was just another day out, a moment to breathe away from the spotlight. Suddenly chaos erupted. A woman, visibly pregnant and walking ahead, clutched her belly. Her steps faltered, her face contorted in pain. Then, she collapsed onto the cold pavement. A chilling silence swept over the crowd before panicked whispers turned into a frenzy. Barron froze, his heart pounding. His guards stepped forward instinctively to clear the area, but Barron held up his hand. "Wait," he said, his voice steady but urgent. Something inside him told him he couldn't just walk away. Ignoring the startled looks of onlookers and even his team, he moved toward her. The woman's breaths were shallow, her lips trembling as tears streaked down her cheeks. "Help me," she whispered faintly, her eyes pleading. Barron crouched beside her. His mind raced. This was no ordinary moment. It was a matter of life and death. Barron knelt closer, scanning the woman's face. Her pain was palpable, and it gripped him in a way he'd never felt before. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, his voice trembling. I don't know." "The baby," she gasped, clutching her stomach. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring nervously, but no one stepped forward to help. One of Barron's guards leaned in. "Sir, we should call an ambulance. Let us handle this." "No," Barron interrupted sharply, surprising even himself. He looked into the woman's frightened eyes. "She needs help now." Pulling out his phone, Barron dialed 911. As he relayed the situation to the dispatcher, he kept his free hand on the woman's shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "Help is on the way," he assured her. Though his heart was racing with fear, the woman winced, her breaths growing more erratic. "Please, don't let my baby die," she pleaded weakly. Her words hit Barron like a thunderbolt. His chest tightened, and for the first time, the weight of what was happening truly sank in. He wasn't just saving a stranger, he was fighting for 2 lives. The sirens were still distant, their wailing growing louder but painfully slow. Barron could feel the seconds stretching into eternity. His guards stood tense, forming a protective barrier around him and the woman, but Barron's focus never wavered. "Stay with me," he said firmly, his voice filled with determination. "What's your name?" "Amy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Okay, Amy," Barron said, gripping her hand gently. "Help is coming. Just hold on a little longer." Amy's eyes flickered with fear and exhaustion. "It hurts. I can't." Barron's heart sank. He glanced at his lead guard. "Where's the ambulance?" he demanded, his calm demeanor beginning to crack. "It's close, sir," the guard replied, his tone urgent. Barron tightened his grip on Amy's hand. "You're strong, Amy. Think of your baby. You're both going to be okay." Amy's eyes welled with tears, her lips quivering. "Thank you," she whispered. In that moment, something shifted. Barron wasn't just a bystander. He was her lifeline, and he wasn't letting go. The ambulance was still minutes away, but Amy's condition was worsening. Her breathing became shallow, and her grip on Barron's hand grew weaker. Barron leaned closer. "Amy, look at me," he said, his voice steady but desperate. "You have to stay awake. Think about your baby. You can't give up now." Amy's tear-filled eyes locked onto his. "I can't. I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice breaking. Barron felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't a doctor, and the helplessness gnawed at him. His guard stood firm, trying to maintain a perimeter, but the growing crowd only fueled his urgency. "Sir, the paramedics are delayed by traffic," one guard informed him, his voice tense. Barron's mind raced. He looked around and saw the fear in the eyes of bystanders. No one knew what to do. Suddenly, a thought struck him. He took off his jacket, folded it, and gently placed it under Amy's head. "We can't wait," he muttered to himself. He glanced at his guard again. "Can we carry her closer to the ambulance?" The guard hesitated, but nodded. The situation was spiraling, and Barron knew every second counted. Carefully, Barron instructed, his voice calm yet commanding. His guards moved swiftly, lifting Amy with precision. Her body was frail, and her pain was visible with every shallow breath. Barron stayed close, holding her hand tightly as they made their way to the street, where they hoped the ambulance would arrive faster. The crowd parted, murmuring in awe at the young man's composure. Amy winced, her tears flowing freely. "Please, don't let my baby die," she whispered again, her voice so faint it was almost inaudible. Barron's grip on her hand tightened. "You're not alone, Amy. I promise you, you and your baby will be fine," he said, though inside, he was trembling. A car screeched to a halt nearby, and a man jumped out. "I'm a doctor," he yelled, rushing over. Relief flooded Barron's face. The doctor quickly assessed Amy's condition. "She's in labor, and she's in distress. We need to stabilize her now," he said, opening his medical kit. Barron knelt beside Amy as the doctor worked. The sirens grew louder, but Amy's eyes fluttered shut. "No, Amy," Barron said, panic creeping into his voice. "Stay with us." Amy's eyes barely opened, her voice just a whisper. "Barron, thank you." "No," Barron said firmly, tears brimming in his eyes. "You don't thank me yet. You fight. You hear me? You fight for your baby." The doctor worked quickly, administering first aid and guiding Barron on how to help. "Keep her talking," he said. "She needs to stay conscious until the ambulance gets here." Barron nodded, his hand never leaving Amy's. "Amy, tell me about your baby. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl?" "A girl," she murmured, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "Her name is Hope." "Hope," Barron repeated, his voice breaking. "That's perfect. You're going to meet her soon, Amy. You just have to hold on." Amy's breathing slowed, and the doctor's expression grew grim. "We're running out of time," he muttered. The ambulance finally arrived, paramedics rushing out with a stretcher. Barron stepped back but stayed close, watching as they worked to stabilize Amy. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Amy's eyes met Barron's one last time. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "I'm right behind you," Barron promised, climbing into his car to follow them. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the vehicle roared to life. Barron watched helplessly from his SUV as the ambulance sped away. "Stay close," he instructed his driver, his voice sharp and unwavering. The car weaved through traffic, the sirens growing fainter as the ambulance pulled ahead. Barron sat in silence, his mind replaying the haunting image of Amy's fragile body. Her words echoed in his ears. "Don't let my baby die." He glanced at his guard, who seemed equally tense. "Do you think she'll make it?" Barron asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Sir, you did everything you could," the guard replied. "The doctors will take it from here." But Barron couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He had stepped into Amy's life during her most vulnerable moment, and now, every fiber of his being felt responsible for her survival. As the hospital came into view, Barron's chest tightened. He had faced cameras, criticism, and the weight of his name, but nothing prepared him for this kind of fear. The SUV stopped, and Barron stepped out, determination etched on his face. He wasn't leaving until he knew Amy and her baby were safe. The hospital lobby buzzed with controlled chaos, nurses rushing, patients waiting, families pacing. Barron's tall frame and recognizable face turned heads, but he ignored the whispers and stares. A nurse approached hesitantly. "Mr. Trump, may I help you?" "I'm here for Amy," Barron said quickly. "She was brought in just now, a pregnant woman." The nurse's expression softened. "She's in emergency care. They're doing everything they can." "Can I see her?" Barron asked, his voice uncharacteristically pleading. The nurse shook her head. "Not yet. Please wait here." Barron nodded, taking a seat in the corner of the room. His guards stood nearby, their presence both protective and intimidating. Time dragged painfully, each minute feeling like an eternity. He stared at the door leading to the emergency unit, imagining the scene inside. Was Amy fighting? Was the baby okay? The uncertainty gnawed at him. A doctor finally emerged, scanning the room. Barron jumped to his feet. How is she? The doctor hesitated, his face serious. She's stable for now, but we have complications. The baby may need an emergency delivery. Barron's heart sank. Was this the end? Barron followed the doctor down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor. The tension was suffocating. What does that mean? Is Amy in danger? He asked, struggling to mask the panic in his voice. The doctor sighed. Her blood pressure is dangerously low, and the baby's heart rate is erratic. If we don't act soon, we could lose them both. Barron felt the weight of the words like a punch to his chest. Do whatever it takes to save them, he said firmly. We'll try, the doctor replied, disappearing behind the double doors of the operating room. Barron slumped against the wall, his hands trembling. He had always believed in the power of action, of making things happen, but now, he was utterly powerless. Minutes turned into an agonizing hour. Barron paced the hallway, his mind filled with questions he couldn't answer. What if Amy didn't survive? What if the baby didn't make it? Finally, a nurse approached. She's in surgery, she said gently. We'll update you soon. Barron nodded, swallowing hard. He glanced at the ceiling and whispered a prayer. For Amy. For hope. For a miracle. Barron leaned against the cold hospital wall, staring blankly at the operating room doors. He had faced cameras and critics his entire life, but this moment felt heavier than anything he had ever endured. His head dropped into his hands, and for a brief moment, he let his guard down. What if I failed her? He whispered to himself. One of his guards approached hesitantly. Sir, you've done everything you could. You were the first to help her. That's what matters. Barron nodded but remained silent. He had never felt so helpless. A deep sense of responsibility weighed on him, not because of who he was, but because of the bond he had formed with Amy in those fleeting, desperate moments. Suddenly, the operating room doors swung open and the doctor appeared. His face was lined with exhaustion. Mr. Trump, we're performing an emergency C-section. The baby's chances are slim, but we're doing everything we can. Amy's condition remains critical. Barron felt a lump in his throat. Doctor, he said, his voice breaking, promise me you'll fight for them. Promise me they'll both have a chance. The doctor placed a reassuring hand on Barron's shoulder. We'll do everything possible. Time crawled as Barron paced the hallway, his fists clenched at his sides. Every second felt like a lifetime. The sound of footsteps or the rustling of scrubs made his heart race, only to sink again when no news came. Finally, a nurse approached, her face unreadable. Barron's stomach churned. How are they? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The nurse hesitated before speaking. The baby has been delivered, she said. It's a girl, but she's very weak. We've placed her in the neonatal intensive care unit. She's fighting, but it's touch and go. Barron felt his knees weaken, but he steadied himself. And Amy? She's still in critical condition. She lost a lot of blood, but the doctors are working to stabilize her. Barron closed his eyes, his chest heaving as he fought back tears. A fragile thread of hope was all he had to hold on to. Can I see the baby? The nurse hesitated, then nodded. Come with me. She led him to a room filled with soft beeping sounds. In an incubator lay a tiny baby, her chest rising and falling weakly. Barron stared, his heart breaking at the sight. Hope, he whispered. You've got to live up to your name. Barron stood by the incubator, his hand resting gently on the glass. The baby was so small, so fragile, yet her presence felt monumental. Hope, he whispered again. The name felt fitting, yet unbearably heavy. A nurse joined him. She's fighting hard, she said softly. But it's going to be a long road. Premature babies like her need every ounce of strength to survive. Barron nodded, his gaze never leaving the tiny figure. She's not just fighting for herself, he murmured. She's fighting for Amy too. He turned to the nurse. What can I do? The nurse smiled gently. You're already doing it. Just being here helps. Sometimes love and presence can do more than we realize. Barron swallowed hard. He had never felt so connected to someone he had only just met. Amy's courage, her love for her unborn child, and now Hope's fragile fight. It was all intertwined in a way he couldn't explain. As he stood there, a single tear rolled down his cheek. You're not alone, Hope, he whispered. I'm here, and I'm not leaving until you and your mom are safe. Barron paced the waiting room, his thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Amy and her baby were fighting for their lives, and he was powerless to do anything but wait. His hands were trembling as he gripped his phone, but he couldn't make the call. His mind kept returning to the quiet, fragile baby in the incubator. I've never felt so helpless, he muttered to himself. His guards were silently keeping watch, their presence a silent reassurance. Yet Barron's mind refused to settle. Suddenly the doors opened, and the same doctor who had spoken to him earlier appeared, his face weary but determined. Barron's heart skipped a beat. Doctor, how is she? The doctor met his gaze, his expression serious but not without a flicker of hope. We've done all we can for Amy. She's stable, but we're not out of the woods yet. The baby, we're not sure. Barron's chest tightened, a knot of fear forming deep inside. What do you mean? The baby's heart rate is still very low. We're monitoring her closely. It's a waiting game. Barron nodded, swallowing hard. I'll wait, however long it takes. Hours passed. Barron's exhaustion was beginning to show, but he refused to leave. The sterile smell of the hospital, the constant beeping of machines, and the quiet whispers of staff filled the room. Time seemed to stand still. Then, as if by some miracle, the nurse reappeared with a smile that Barron hadn't seen all day. Mr. Trump, she said, her voice gentle. The baby, her heart rate has stabilized. Barron's eyes widened with disbelief. Really? Yes. We're cautiously optimistic now. She's still very weak, but she's holding on. Barron felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't the outcome he had imagined, but it was a start. Can I see her again? The nurse nodded. She led Barron back to the neonatal unit, where the tiny baby lay in the incubator. Her chest rose and fell with each fragile breath. Barron stood at her side, his heart swelling with emotions he couldn't name. You're a fighter, Hope, Barron whispered. You've already won the hardest part. The next morning, Barron returned to the hospital, his mind still full of worry and hope. As he entered the neonatal unit, the nurse greeted him with a cautious smile. She's been doing better, Mr. Trump. Her breathing is stronger, and she's responding to touch. Barron couldn't hold back the tears that welled up in his eyes. He had never experienced anything like this before, and the overwhelming sense of relief was almost too much. Thank you, he said softly, his voice cracking. Thank you for fighting for her. The nurse nodded. It's our job, but your presence has made a difference. She feels your love. Barron stepped closer to the incubator, his heart full. Hope was still small, still fragile, but now there was a fighting chance. He placed his hand gently on the glass as though to offer his strength to her. In that moment, Barron knew that this baby had already changed his life. He wasn't sure why, but he was bound to her in a way he couldn't explain. Stay strong, Hope, he whispered. You and your mom have come so far. You'll make it through. The days blurred together. Barron couldn't sleep. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Amy and the baby. Hope's tiny frame, her fragile fight for life, played in his mind like a looping nightmare. One evening, Barron received a call from the hospital that made his heart stop. Amy's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Her blood pressure had dropped dangerously low, and the doctors were concerned about her ability to survive the procedure to remove the breathing tube. As Barron rushed to the hospital, his mind raced. Was this the moment? He arrived at the hospital, and without waiting for guidance, he headed straight for Amy's room. The sterile air in the ICU felt suffocating as he approached her bed. "Please," he whispered, squeezing her hand. "Fight for your baby." He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but he had to believe she could. Her face looked so fragile, but her heart, he believed, was as strong as steel. Suddenly, the doctor entered. "Mr. Trump, we have to act quickly. If we don't intervene now, we might lose both of them." Barron was frozen. He had to make a choice that no one should ever have to make. Barron looked at Amy, pale and fragile, and then at Hope, struggling but alive. Every cell in his body screamed for them to survive. He turned to the doctor, his voice breaking. "Do everything. Please, save them both." The doctor nodded, and the room erupted into a flurry of activity. Barron stepped back, watching, hoping, praying. Time felt like it had slowed down. The machines beeped ominously. Barron could hear his heart pounding in his ears as he watched every movement, every decision made in those final moments. Minutes stretched on like hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor emerged from the room, his expression unreadable. Barron rushed to him, almost afraid to ask. "The operation was successful," the doctor said softly. "Both Amy and her baby are stable. They made it through." A flood of relief washed over Barron, and for the first time in days, he let himself exhale. He had never felt this kind of gratitude before. The weight of the world lifted off his shoulders, and he looked toward the future, one that was filled with hope. The hospital room was quiet now. Barron stood by the window, watching the sunrise. It was a new day, a new beginning. Amy was asleep, her hand still gripping his, and hope was growing stronger with each passing hour. Barron couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just a matter of days. He had been forced to face the darkest of fears, but it had led him to a light he never expected. He had saved 2 lives, and in doing so, he had found a deeper part of himself. As Amy slowly woke, Barron was at her side. "You made it," he whispered. "You both made it." Amy's eyes fluttered open, and she smiled weakly. "We did. Thanks to you." Barron smiled back, his heart full. "No, you did. I was just there to help." The room was filled with quiet joy. Barron knew that this was a moment he would carry with him forever. He had witnessed the power of love and hope, and it had changed him for the better. Thank you for joining Barron on this emotional journey. If you were moved by the story of courage, kindness, and hope, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more heartwarming stories that inspire and touch lives.